Hi, everybody. So, as some of you may know, I've been researching the Hope and American Opportunity tax credits the past few weeks of the course. So, this presentation is going to dive a little bit into what I've found regarding the tax credits and whether or not I found that they're successful or not, and finally, a recommendation what I think should be done regarding the tax credits. So first, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the purpose and history, going into what the original intention of each tax law was and how it came to fruition. I'm going to move into the technical aspects of both the Hope Credit and the AOTC, the American Opportunity Tax Credit, and then talk a little bit about the key factors that I researched and my findings on those, and then again, my final recommendations on what I think should be done. So beginning with the purpose and history, the Hope Credit was originally enacted in 1997 through the Taxpayer Relief Act. The Joint Committee on Taxation commented that the credit was enacted in order to make college more accessible and affordable for low and middle income families, particularly low income families for that matter, at least with the Hope Credit. It was first originally discussed in the 1960s, so it wasn't anything new to the topic of education, but tax credits were later shelved in favor of grants, loans, and work studies, as that was less costly from a federal revenue standpoint. Education credits resurfaced during the 1990s when President Clinton was at a Princeton commencement speech and had said that he wanted to make college more affordable and accessible for students. I believe the exact language that he used was he wanted to make the next 4 years of education just as accessible as a student's first 12 years of their academic career. Then in later 2009, the American Opportunity Tax Credit replaced the Hope Credit. It really used the same purpose. It was striving for the same goal, which was to make it more affordable and accessible. But in the end, it really tried to make a whole different class of students able to take the credit, and we'll see that with the phase-out ranges in a minute. But this was following the 2008 crisis, so this is part of that 2009 stimulus package from President Obama and his administration. So the technical aspects of the Hope Credit, the maximum value of the credit was $1,800 per student. Qualifying expenses were strictly related to tuition and the enrollment fees related to the education. It was only available for the first 2 years of post-secondary education, so if you went to a four-year college, it did not matter. You were only allowed to take the credit for the first two. And the phase-out range at the initial enactment was $40,000 to $50,000 for single filers, $80,000 to $100,000 for married filing joint. It was later indexed for inflation, so there is a bit of a difference in the phase-out ranges. So single was $48,000 to $58,000 adjusted for inflation. Married filing joint, $96,000 to $116,000 indexed for inflation. And an important distinction is that the credit was non-refundable. The AOTC, on the other hand, was 40% or is 40% refundable, meaning you can get up to a $1,000 refund for eligible taxpayers. It's a maximum credit of $2,500, and it does include required course material. So think like books for classes. Room and board, however, is not part of the required course materials. That's completely excluded from the credit. And the final distinction that you'll notice from the original Hope Credit was you can take the credit for your first 4 years of post-secondary education. So if you go to a four-year university, then you can take your credit for all 4 years that you're there. And then the phase-out range is $80,000 to $90,000 for single, $160,000 to $180,000. So you can see that I believe the Hope Credit was phased out completely at $116,000. This is a big jump, almost $200,000 is your total phase out. So there's definitely an intention to reach a whole new class. So my key factors, these are the three factors that I thought were most important for looking at whether or not the education credits had been successful since their enactment and whether or not they were meeting their original purpose. So first, I thought there needed to be an increase in post-secondary education enrollment. This, I think, was paramount and I think the most important aspect. Second, I thought there should be a decrease in the number of students financing their education with debt-based solutions. So think loans with interest, whether that be government loans or bank loans, whatever it may be. And then finally, I said there should be a increase in low AGI taxpayers taking advantage of the credit, and vice versa. There should be a decrease in the amount of high AGI taxpayers taking advantage of the credit over the course of the credit's life. Factor one, the increase in post-secondary education enrollment. Most experts have said that this isn't really a factor, or the credit that is really a non-factor when it comes to making a significant impact on enrollment. It's really not enough financial assistance to really make a student who's on the fence really change their mind. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, did an analysis and confirmed the same theory and said that it's really a non-factor. They cited Thomas Kane, who did his own study separately, and said that at best, two-year institutions could see a 4% increase in enrollment and a 1% or less than 1% increase in four-year institutions. So really, you're not talking about a huge jump in enrollment. And 93% of recipients of the credit said it was a non-factor when deciding to go to college. So that's just confirming what a lot of experts had said. And something that's really important is that the credit can take up to 1 year to receive. So when you're talking about low-income families, that really doesn't add up. The financial assistance needs to be upfront and paramount first. So factor two, there needed to be a decrease in the number of students financing their education with debt. I think we can all agree student loans have gotten worse over the past few years. I don't think they're getting better at all. As of quarter four 2018, there was $1.5 trillion of outstanding debt spread amongst almost 50 million students. Just for comparison, that in quarter one of 2003, there was only $24 billion outstanding. So that's grown quite a bit in the past, 15 years. In 2009, ironically, student debt had become the most or the highest outstanding debt in the nation after surpassing credit card and auto debt. I find that's ironic just because that's the year that the AOTC had took over for the Hope credit. So just I find that ironic. And the fastest growing demographic, or at least one of the fastest, is the age of 60 and over in terms of student loan debt. And that's largely due to a few different factors that I'll touch on in a minute. So factor two, you can see this is a graph representing the total student debt. You can follow this blue line here. You can see in 2009 it passed auto loans and credit cards as the highest form of outstanding debt, which ironically was the same year as the AOTC had come out. And 60 and over, as I mentioned, is becoming the highest or fastest growing demographic as far as student loans go. And I think a lot of people are saying that this is due to grandparents taking on student debt for their grandchildren because their grandchildren can't take on more. So that's a pretty scary statistic when you see the amount of increase in every demographic, excluding specifically the 16 over. And my final factor needed to be that there was an increase in low AGI taxpayers taking advantage of the credit. Unfortunately, this was not the case at all. Actually, the demographic that's getting the most is the upper echelon of the phase-out range, which is the $100,000 to $200,000 range. So I'll show you a quick graphical representation on the next slide. And here you can see that upper echelon, that $100,000 to $200,000 range, is receiving overwhelmingly the most support as far as the AOTC credit dollars go. I do think this is pretty sad because I thought this would be a pretty foregone conclusion that um, the the lower AGI registers would be getting most of the benefit, but sadly, it's clearly not the case according to the IRS statistics. Um, since the enactment of the AOTC, the $20,000 to $100,000 range is receiving less credit dollars um, than they were with the Hope credits. So um, the low income families that were supposed to be benefiting from this Hope credit or AOTC credit really aren't getting the assistance that they really need. So my final recommendation, because I don't really think that this credit is really doing what it intended. Maybe its original intention wasn't to benefit students. I don't really know, but I really think it should be re-examined and looked at and revised. So Congress, I think, has two overwhelming options. I think one, you can revisit the credit and increase it, which I think is extremely unlikely. I think any amount of credit is going to be completely either enormous and unrealistic, or it's going to be too small to really make a difference. If it's too big, I don't think you can really afford to give that much credit. As you know, credits are dollar for dollar, so they are worth a lot. I don't think you can make it worth $15,000, $30,000 worth of credit. College keeps increasing every year, and it's only getting worse. So I don't think increasing the credit is really going to help. Instead, I think maybe foregoing the AOTC and looking at expanding on the 529 plans. Maybe looking at increasing the amount of qualified education expenses. Maybe looking at making it a before tax deduction, similar to a 401k. I believe right now it's an after tax deduction. An after tax investment. So I think there's ways of looking at this, but I think the overwhelming issue is that education is becoming more and more expensive through the years, and it's really not looking like it's getting any better. So I think, if anything, I think families need to do a better job of trying to save. I know it's difficult, but clearly the credit is not a viable solution for people.